Hello, this is Lobsang, and I'd first like to thank for this opportunity to present on this online program. What I'm going to try to do today is to uh, give you and present you with reasons why it may be important to complement current forms of mindfulness as practiced in the West with the four foundations of mindfulness, which is the original teachings of the Buddha on mindfulness as currently preserved in the Pali Nikayas, which is the canon, the Buddhist canon of the Buddha's teachings. Now, in order to do that, first I'd like to start with our understanding of Mbsr, which is the primary form of mindfulness that is currently studied, practiced, and understood in the West. Mindfulness originated and derived its primary origins from the New Burmese school of Buddhism in the late 60s, when many Western teachers such as Jack Cornfield and others went to study and practice intensely in Asia. And then when they came back, they adapted those teachings to suit a Western mindset. I'm going to, and then later it was, of course, adapted and for clinical use. And in particular, I'm going to reference the clinical integration of Mbsr by Dr. Shapiro, since that seems to be the closest version to that presented by John Kabat-Zinn. In her version, she identifies three main components to the practice of mindfulness, which is first is the intention, a purposeful intention to engage in non-judgmental, present-centered awareness. And then the second component is attention, which is really vaguely defined as present-centered awareness. It's important to note that attention and present-centered awareness may appear to be two different cognitive functions, both from a traditional Buddhist and cognitive science perspective. And the third component she integrates is positive attitudes. That is, as you engage in present-centered awareness, you bring to it a positive attitude of being non-striving, of being accepting, and being non-judgmental. This form of Mbsr and other versions of it that were developed clinically and then studied showed enormous amount of early evidence and promise, as evidenced by the fact that in 2000 there were about just a handful of studies on meditation, but by 2016 you have over 700 studies carried out, including well-designed randomized studies. And this clearly shows that Mbsr is here to stay and is incredibly important in its application for clinical use, not only just for psychiatric, but also health-related conditions, as well as in the field of social and educational programs. However, in the last few years, there has been an increasing number of studies not many, but very well designed, probably the most well designed studies, which begin to raise some concerns about the previous findings. For instance, you have studies by McKellen and others in 2011, which shows that when they used active control to compare it with mindfulness, that they found that the MBSR did not show any significant advantage over the active control, which was a match for every component of MBSR except for mindfulness. And furthermore, there are other studies which raise question about whether the non-judgmental component of mindfulness may actually lead to some degree of false memory. In a yet-to-be-published study, there's evidence that when they looked at the neural correlates of MBSR with the previous active control, again there was no neural evidence to show that MBSR had any major advantage over the active control. In fact, in what is regarded as the most comprehensive meta-analysis carried out by a part of the Department of Human Health, which is responsible for quality control of care, they found that there was significant evidence with a small effect size for attention, relapse prevention in depression and chronic pain as regards mindfulness. However, no significant effect or was found for the wide range of other criteria they looked for. In addition, the questions have been raised about the measures that are being used in mindfulness, particularly regarding the construct and content validity about these different instruments. In addition, there are concerns about the lack of a real operational definition as a result. And this is evidenced by a study which tried to look at Shapiro's hypothesis that perceiving was a critical mechanism of MBSR, and that study, however, failed to find evidence for that. As a result of all of these concerns, major researchers in the field are now suggesting caution about how we interpret the findings of MBSR. Not to say that MBSR doesn't work. Clearly, it's enormously important intervention, but caution needs to be exhibited in interpreting this information so that we can better study the phenomena. However, it's not just about better research designs and research questions that seem to be the problem here. My sense is that MBSR, when it was formulated, uprooted itself from the well-defined understanding, definition of perception and cognition outlined in the ancient Buddhist texts that informed the understanding of mindfulness, and rather relied upon solely the practice of it, which was subjectively presented or taught, and then reformulated to suit a Western mindset. The lack of a conceptual framework, thus, in defining and operationalizing my Mbsr, to my mind, seems to be a very critical issue. As a result, when a construct such as mindfulness, if it lacks a conceptual framework, is less likely to be able to be operationalized. That is to say, develop measures that accurately measures the components of that particular construct, such as being fully present, non-judgmental, acceptance, non-striving, etc., whatever the components ascribed to Mbsr. And consequently, this makes it very difficult to predict and control the study and formulate appropriate research questions. And this may thus be may be one of the major reasons why we are seeing such variations in the findings as regard to Mbsr. Against this backdrop, then there is clearly a need to look back at the four foundations of mindfulness, because it, on the other hand, is based on a conceptual framework. In fact, a very well-defined conceptual framework, and appears to meet the 6 criteria that Fawcett recommended in that conceptual framework needs to meet. For instance, comprehensiveness of content. What that means is that the content shouldn't just be a random set of ideas based on solely on subjective experience, but they have to be verified by previous research if it's available, and if not, certainly be verified against previous academic literature, as well as subjective experiences and insights by practitioners, not of just one school, but a variety of schools. And then the concepts and components of a construct like mindfulness should be formulated. For instance, if you take attention as one of the concepts and component of mindfulness, attention has to be clearly first studied as presented in the Buddhist academic literature or the psychological literature, as well as in cognitive science, and then also compared the experiences of attention reported by meditators, not of only that particular school, but other related schools. And from that, the concept that defines attention has to be clearly spelled out so that there's clarity in the definition, so that and that it allows clearly to spell out what attention means in this particular case and what it does not. And that provides the framework for then developing a measure that can accurately capture what attention is. But unfortunately, that is, as it's quite evident with various components of Mbsr, be it acceptance, non-judgmental, non-striving, attention, etc., present-centered awareness, this appears to be lacking to quite a significant degree. Now, before we talk about the four foundations of mindfulness, it's good to know a bit about the Burmese school of Buddhism, because my sense is that's really the source of where my Mbsr is derived from. The Burmese school, like Mbsr, diverges, according to Buddhist scholars, quite significantly from from the original teachings of mindfulness, or the four foundations of mindfulness. And it's understandable, because when the British colonized Burma in the late 19th centuries, then there were reformers, including within the Buddhist monastic traditions, who felt that Buddhist practice should not be rigidly confined within the monastic walls, but they should be simplified and made more accessible to the lay people. And as a result, these incredible teachers like Mahasi Sayadev began to embark on that journey. And thus you have these mindfulness as presented by these new Burmese school of Buddhism, which though diverges from the original teachings, yet made it extremely accessible and laid the foundation for its introduction to the West as being something that is easily accessible, doable, and available.